What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves as the Minnesota Timberwolves make a gigantic splash trading for Utah Jazz center Rudy Gobert. Did the Wolves give up too much for Rudy Gobert? Effectively 5 first-round draft picks. Plus, how does Rudy Gobert factor into what the Wolves have going on right now next to Karl Anthony-Towns, Anthony Edwards, and D'Angelo Russell? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net continues to be your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and stats info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, all of that and more. They've also got you covered for UFC, MMA, boxing, you name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. It's your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And right now, you can take a look at BetOnline to see the odds for who is going to be the favorite for Rookie of the Year in the NBA next season. Right now, Paolo Banchero leading the pack at plus 300. You got Jabari Smith Jr. at plus 375. And a little bit further down the list, Chet Holmgren at plus 575, Jaden Ivey at plus 650, and then Keegan Murray, a distant fifth, at plus 900 to win Rookie of the Year. So for all of that and more odds, head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action available to you. Bet online. It's where the game starts. Joining us now is Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves. You can follow on Twitter at BBeacon. Now, Ben, until the KD situation resolves itself, the Rudy Gobert trade is the biggest trade of the offseason so far. Let's kind of unpack this. Leaving the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're dealing Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, just drafted Walker Kessler, and Jared Vanderbilt, plus 4 future first-round picks in 2023, 2025, 2027, those 3 unprotected, and then a top 5 protected pick in 2029. On the surface, that seems to be a pretty steep price to pay for Rudy Gobert. Effectively 5 first-round picks and some rotation players on top of that to match salary. Was this an overpay in your mind from Minnesota?
That's such a tough question to answer. So on its face, yes. I mean, I think if we're just looking at this in a vacuum, what they gave up, essentially, like you said, 5 first-round picks, because there's 3 unprotected picks, a protected pick, plus the guy you just drafted, plus a swap. So kind of 6 picks, plus a good chunk of your rotation. So yeah, I think in a vacuum. But on the other hand, they didn't give up any of their top 5 players. Depending on what you think about Patrick Beverley, and obviously he was really important to the team last year, but he's a free agent next year. He's 32, that whole thing. So they've still got Karl Anthony-Towns, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and D'Angelo Russell, who you would argue are certainly their top 4 players. And then you're adding another probably top 20 player, almost certainly. And so obviously the bet here is, assuming Anthony Edwards makes another mini leap or even a larger leap, if he becomes a top 20 player himself, and you've got 3 top 20 players, certainly top 25 players on your roster, then it feels about right. There's a lot of things to hash out, but on its face in a vacuum, sure, I can buy that. Obviously the Timberwolves are taking a big swing. But the bet is obviously, hey, we're going to have 3 top 20 players plus Jaden McDaniels. We kept our top 4 guys. So you can understand why they made the move, certainly.
Yeah, no, I think you got to commend the Timberwolves for taking the big swing. Whether or not the big swing ultimately pays off is a completely different set of questions. But when we look at this, I think especially for me and for many others, I think you're looking at this trade and you're kind of scratching your head at the fit between Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony-Towns, 2 legitimate 5s at the NBA level. Now you've got, the Twin Towers and the Twin Cities, if you will. And at this point, I mean, how does that pairing even look with Rudy and KAT sharing the floor with one another?
I think you could do a lot of different things. I mean, certainly defensively, you could do what the Timberwolves did last year, which is play a lot of high wall pick and roll coverage, and you play Towns at the level of the screen, and then Gobert can roam the back line and kind of, protect at the rim, which is what he's best at. The Jazz did a lot of drop coverage with Rudy, and it worked until certain times in the playoffs, but that was largely because the Jazz perimeter defenders, primarily Donovan Mitchell, Clarkson, Bogdanovich, these guys just could not contain the ball. And if the Wolves want to play drop, if Gobert is in the pick and roll, then they can. And then, KAT can play high wall when he's in the pick and roll, and you have Gobert roam the baseline, like I said. And then the other thing is you just have better perimeter defenders that can A, contain the ball, and then B, when the defense collapses, go back and watch some of those playoff losses, this year to Dallas and last year as well for the Jazz. It's because Gobert was both trying to protect the rim and get back out on the perimeter and contest the corner three. As long as you have guys that can X out on the perimeter and contest corner threes that are, aware and versatile and mobile, then I think it works defensively. And I would argue that the Timberwolves, Jaden McDaniels is far better as a perimeter defender than anyone the Jazz has. I would argue Kyle Anderson, new signee as well, is as well. And Anthony Edwards was pretty good on the ball last year. Taurean Prince is a pretty versatile defender. So there's a better group of defenders around Gobert. He was essentially the only good defensive player, really, that played consistently besides maybe Royce O'Neal, and he wasn't as good this last year. And he dragged the Jazz defense into a top 10 defense. With him off the floor, Utah was not a playoff caliber defense. And then offensively, I think you can, same thing. The Wolves have essentially played with a 5 next to Towns all along. Towns plays more like a 4. Jared Vanderbilt doesn't shoot outside of 3 feet next to the rim. So even though he was a 4, he played functionally like a 5. So you can do a lot of the same stuff offensively, but Gobert has he's far more dangerous, more roll gravity in the pick and roll than Vanderbilt's ever did. He's got far better hands than Vando. So there's certainly more versatility, I think, than maybe people who are only kind of paying attention might think. But there's certainly going to be, the Timberwolves going to need to be creative, I think, on both ends of the floor, because to your point, playing essentially 2 7-footers, it's not something a lot of teams are doing right now.
I love that you highlighted the perimeter defenders that the Wolves do have, because I do think you're absolutely right. They've got a much better squad, oriented towards, kind of defending the perimeter than the Jazz really ever had in the Gobert, Donovan Mitchell era, if you will. And so I'm excited to kind of see how that plays out. But I can't help but look, Ben, at KAT, right? You talked about flexibility, versatility defensively, and maybe I'm underselling KAT here a little bit, but I just look at him as the weak link in that defensive chain, if you will, and he's going to be the guy that everybody targets. So to you, does KAT have the ability to effectively play the 4 defensively, which in today's NBA means, oftentimes guarding wings on the perimeter?
I think so. My main concern for him isn't in the pick and roll, because once they stopped playing drop coverage a couple of years ago, he actually was pretty good this year defensively. I would put him as, maybe a slight net positive defensively for the Wolves because of the scheme they were playing, right? But my concern would be if teams, and this is also similar to what teams did to Gobert in the Jazz, is if they just play 5 out and if they can isolate Towns on the ball, he's far better than certainly most 5s and even some 4s in terms of lateral quickness, and combined with some pretty good length and decent athleticism. But the foul trouble issue is a bigger deal for him. I think he can stay in front of guys, but now that he's one of the most foul prone players in the league and has been his whole career, he's got a reputation. And as we all know, reputation precedes these guys. Refs are quicker on their whistles. So I worry a little bit about teams going at Towns in isolation more so than I do in the pick and roll. But the reminder the coaching staff will give to Towns is, hey, you've got Jaden McDaniels getting chased down blocks. You've got Rudy Gobert in the paint. Like, if you get beat, we'd rather you get beat on a play than pick up a bunch of quick fouls. So that's my main concern. But I think he'll do okay against, a lot of 4s now are stretch 4s anyway. And Towns is more physical than they are. And as long as he can play within himself and not get into a ton of foul trouble, I think he'll do okay guarding most 4s.
This past season, the Wolves won 46 games. They were a top spot in the Western play-in tournament. They earned a first-round date with the 2-seeded Memphis Grizzlies. How much does this move, and in conjunction as well, you mentioned, the addition of Kyle Anderson earlier, which I thought was a sneaky great signing for the Wolves. When I was breaking down free agency winners and losers, I was like, the Wolves absolutely won this, getting Kyle Anderson on such a, a relatively team-friendly deal for the production that he provides. How much do these two moves really move the needle for the Timberwolves? Do you think they could make a jump and be a top 4 team in the West this season if they were to roll into the season with this exact lineup that they have right now?
I think it's certainly possible. I think my initial reaction right when it happened was, oh man, this makes them a round better. The Jazz consistently got to the second round in the playoffs, for most of the Gobert and Mitchell era. And it feels like that's, it makes them a top 8-10 team in the league. That was kind of my initial reaction. Then, of course, you look at the Western Conference standings and you remind yourself, like, hey, Golden State's not going anywhere. Denver's likely not going anywhere with their, Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. getting healthy. The Suns are, people are just kind of forgetting about the Suns because of the way their season ended. That's 3 teams right there. And then obviously Memphis is lurking and Dallas isn't probably going anywhere. So it's going to be really tough. I think certainly what it does, and it better if you're giving it 5 first-round picks, it certainly raises the floor, right? There's no way they should finish below the 6th seed in the Western Conference. But the ceiling, I think, is probably still a little bit better. I think that, this team is absolutely a top 6 team in the West, and they very well could be the 3rd or 4th seed if things come together the way that the Timberwolves front office and head coach Chris Finch, who, by the way, this is a much longer conversation, and I'll definitely talk about this on Locked On Wolves, but he was a big part of the Pelicans coaching staff when they played DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis together. He was a big part of a season in Denver with Nurkic and Jokic together. He likes to play big. He talks often about how when he coached it overseas, he played 3 centers together in Europe because that's what he had to do. And so Finch, I think, is really going to enjoy this challenge to play these guys together. And that's kind of an interesting side thing to keep an eye on. But I do think it raises the floor and also the ceiling a little bit as well. And I think a top 4 seed is certainly plausible.
What will Rudy Gobert look like in Minnesota? How will the Twin Towers experiment work between Gobert and KAT under Chris Finch? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Wolves. Ben, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Of course. Thanks, Jackson.